Wild West stories. Lonely rancher found a young Apache girl hanging on a tree with a sign. White man, don't forgive. The desert wind carried no mercy that morning. It howled through the brittle mesquite branches, scattering sand like shards of glass against worn boots. Ezekiel Holt, a rancher who had lived more with cattle than with men, tightened the reins on his bay mare. His eyes, weather-worn and cold as river stone, caught something strange against the horizon. A dark shape dangling from a twisted oak at the edge of the arroyo. At first, he thought it was another carcass. Coyotes sometimes left their spoils in such cruel balance. But as he drew closer, his breath stilled. It was a girl. Her small frame swayed lightly in the wind, bare feet hovering above the dirt, black hair whipping across her face. The crude rope cut into the bark, pulling her limp body skyward. Around her neck, not just the noose, but a second tether. A splintered signboard slapped against her chest with every gust. The words, smeared in black pitch, screamed louder than any gunshot. "White man, don't forgive." Ezekiel dismounted slow, his boots crunching over brittle stone. He stood beneath the hanging body, hat pulled low against the sun. She was no older than 14, skin coppered by both bloodline and the unforgiving sun, dressed in a torn deerskin dress that spoke of her people, the Apache. Her wrists were bruised, rope burnt, yet her eyes, half-lidded, flickered. She wasn't gone. Not yet. Ezekiel's jaw tightened. A man who lived by cattle and silence was not often shaken, but here was cruelty laid bare. Neither justice nor war, only a message nailed into flesh. He pulled the knife from his belt, the steel glinting against the noon glare, and with one quick slash, the rope fell. The girl crumpled to the earth with a breath that sounded more like a whimper than life. He crouched, hand hovering above her shoulder. She flinched at even that small shadow, her lips moving with words in Apache he couldn't understand. Blood trickled at her temple, mixing with desert dust. Ezekiel glanced at the sign. Its letters burned in his mind. Vengeance, written by unknown hands. This was no accident. Somebody wanted her death to speak louder than her life. The mare shifted nervously, ears twitching. Out in the silence, beyond the stretch of canyon, Ezekiel felt it. The weight of eyes unseen. Whoever hung her might still be watching. The rancher pressed his hand firm against the girl's chest, feeling the faint drum of her heart. He whispered, almost against himself, "Not today." Then, without another look at the sign, he lifted her into his arms. But the desert was not quiet. A hawk cried overhead, and somewhere among the rocks, a rifle bolt slid into place. The trigger of silence snapped when the first shot whistled past Ezekiel's ear and buried itself in the oak behind him. Splinters rained down on his hat brim. He didn't flinch. Years of cattle raids and border skirmishes had taught him not to. Instead, he shifted his stance, curling his body over the girl's frail form as another round cracked the dust inches from his boots. He didn't carry a rifle that day, just the revolver at his hip, worn smooth from years of draw and reholster. With one hand steadying the girl, he thumbed the Colt free, eyes scanning the ridgeline. The canyon swallowed sound, but somewhere in the jagged rocks above, a shooter adjusted their aim. The girl moaned, barely conscious. Her whisper clawed up through the dust. "No. Stay." It was a warning, though he couldn't catch the full meaning. Apache or English, it didn't matter. Fear was the same in every tongue. Ezekiel weighed his choices. Leave her, and maybe the rifles would fall silent. Carry her, and he'd be a moving target. But he had already decided the moment he cut her down. He'd live with the weight, or die beneath it. Sliding the revolver back into its holster, Ezekiel lifted her higher into his arms, her head lolling against his chest. He pressed his back to the oak trunk, using its shadow as cover, and studied the terrain. The canyon mouth lay 300 yards away. If he could reach the bend, the rocks would shelter him from the ridge, but open ground stretched between, sand, scrub, and nothing else. The mare stamped and whinnied, nostrils flaring. She sensed the threat, but Ezekiel's hand was steady as he whistled low. The horse came close, muscles quivering, ready to bolt. He slung the girl across the saddle, careful not to jolt her too hard, then mounted with the ease of a man born to it. Another shot rang, striking the dirt just shy of the mare's hooves. The animal reared, but Ezekiel leaned hard, whispering calm into her ear. "Steady now. Steady." Then he spurred her into motion. The mare lunged forward, hooves pounding like drums of war. Dust erupted in their wake as bullets chased them, some close enough to tear the air from his lungs. Ezekiel hunched low, shielding the girl with his frame. At the canyon's bend, he pulled them behind a jag of stone, the echoes of gunfire fading. For a breath, there was only silence again, only the rasp of his own lungs and the shallow flutter of hers. He looked down at her face, pale beneath streaks of blood and dust. Whoever she was, she carried enemies that had marked her for death and left their threat for all to see. And now, by choosing to cut her free, Ezekiel had written himself into their story. Her eyes opened for a flicker, dark and heavy, meeting his. A single word slipped from her cracked lips, low, ragged, but sharp enough to cut through the heat. "Run!" The canyon swallowed him whole, the walls rising steep and jagged, painted red with centuries of sun. Ezekiel pulled the mare to a trot, ears straining for the echo of pursuit. The girl sagged against him, her breaths shallow, each one a coin flipped against death. At a narrow turn, Ezekiel dismounted, pressing her against the cool stone. He poured water from his canteen into his palm, touching it to her lips. She coughed, choked, then swallowed weakly. Her eyes opened just enough to reveal the dark fire inside them, suspicion mixed with raw survival. He spoke low, voice gravel against the canyon hush. "You're safe for now." She shook her head. Words spilled from her in Apache, clipped and urgent. Ezekiel caught fragments, sounds he half recognized from old border dealings, but one name cut through clear enough: Carver. The rancher froze. Carver wasn't Apache. He was a white man. Worse than that, Carver was a butcher wearing the mask of a soldier, a drifter who had once ridden with vigilantes and never laid his rifle down after the war ended. Ezekiel had seen his work before, raids that left nothing breathing, bodies hung for spectacle, women and children left as warnings. And now, it seemed, Carver was circling back through Apache lands, sending his messages in blood and rope. The girl gripped Ezekiel's sleeve, strength coming from some stubborn corner of her soul. "He come again," she rasped, broken English piecing itself together. "Kill all." Ezekiel clenched his jaw. He remembered the sign nailed to her chest: "White man don't forgive." But Carver's cruelty wasn't about forgiveness. It was about fire, fear, and the thrill of power. The mare shivered, ears pricking. Ezekiel raised his head, hoofbeats, distant but growing. Carver's men were not far behind. He scanned the canyon. Ahead lay Bitter Ridge, a mining town that barely clung to life. If he could reach it, there'd be shelter. Maybe a doctor willing to patch the girl up. But bringing her there would mean dragging the town into Carver's shadow. The girl's hand slipped from his sleeve, her strength fading again. Ezekiel caught her before she slumped, his arms holding her steady. He had lived most of his years with no one to answer to. No wife, no children, no tribe to call his own. Just land, cattle, and silence. But now, holding this broken child of the desert, he felt something shift. Responsibility. A weight heavier than any saddle. He whispered, as if making a pact with the stone and the sky. He won't have you. Not while I breathe. The echo of hoofbeats drew closer. Shadows flickered along the canyon rim. Carver's riders were coming, rifles in hand, faces hidden by dust masks. Ezekiel pulled his revolver, thumb resting on the hammer, and slid his back against the canyon wall. He knew what this meant. If Carver wanted his message carved into the earth, Ezekiel Holt was about to become part of it. But sometimes the land demanded a stand. The girl stirred in his arms, whispering one last word before slipping under again. "Father." And Ezekiel realized Carver hadn't just chosen her at random. The canyon burned orange under the dying sun, shadows stretching long like the fingers of the earth itself. Ezekiel knew the riders were close, the metallic rattle of bridles, the faint chatter of men who carried cruelty in their voices. He shifted the girl behind a boulder, whispering, "Stay low, don't move." Though her eyes were closed, he believed she heard. Then he stepped into the open. Carver rode at the front, broad shoulders wrapped in a dust-stained duster, rifle slung casual across his saddle. His face, carved by scars and arrogance, broke into a grin when he spotted the rancher. Behind him, half a dozen men fanned out, rifles raised. "Well, well," Carver drawled, voice scraping the air like barbed wire. "Holt, ain't it? Didn't figure you for a savior of redskins." Ezekiel's revolver hung loose at his side. Not aimed, not yet. His voice came steady. "You strung up a child, Carver. Left her to rot for a message. That's not justice. That's rot in a man's soul." Carver laughed, a sound empty of humor. "Justice? Ain't no justice out here, Holt. There's winners and there's bones. Apache been carving us white folk same way for years. I just make sure the carving goes both ways." Ezekiel's eyes narrowed. "That girl's father. You killed him too, didn't you?" Carver's grin faltered, just a flicker, then hardened. "She was bait. Apache chief wouldn't bend, so I snapped him in half. Thought I'd hang the girl up, so every white man passing knew what side they stood on." The desert wind went still. Ezekiel lifted the Colt. For a moment, time held its breath, the weight of all his years of silence pressing down on this one choice. The first shot cracked the dusk. Carver's smile vanished as Ezekiel's bullet tore into his shoulder, pitching him backward off the saddle. Chaos erupted, rifles barked, horses screamed. Ezekiel moved with the calm fury of a storm, every shot deliberate, every step a refusal to let cruelty rule the land. When the dust cleared, 3 men lay sprawled in the sand. 2 had fled into the canyon, and Carver, bleeding, dragged himself against a rock, snarling like a cornered wolf. Ezekiel stood over him, revolver leveled. For a long heartbeat, the rancher's silence stretched, heavier than judgment. Carver spat blood, sneering. "Go on, Holt. Be the white man who forgives." Ezekiel's finger hovered on the trigger. His eyes drifted to the girl, fragile against the boulder, still breathing, then back to Carver. In that pause lived the weight of choice, revenge, or something beyond it. The colt thundered one last time. Dust swallowed the echo. When night fell, Ezekiel carried the girl across the desert toward Bitter Ridge. Each step was heavy, but not hollow. The land had taken blood, as it always did, yet in the girl's faint breath, in the chance of her survival, there was proof that mercy could still be carved from cruelty. The sign's words haunted him. "White man, don't forgive." But Ezekiel knew forgiveness wasn't weakness. It was defiance. In saving her, he had chosen a different message to leave in the desert stone. And under the cold stars, the lonely rancher no longer rode alone.